Good morning, everyone. I'm Jones-Quashie. I'm the contract specialist on the project. David has pretty much covered the purpose of the meeting, but what we're going to do later on in the program is open up the floor for questions and answers. In front of you there are index cards, so we're asking that you reserve all of your questions to the very end of the presentation. Please write your questions down on those cards, and at the end we're going to ask that you pass them forward and we will read them aloud and answer any questions that you might have. In addition to what David said, the purpose is to acquire information from contractors who have the expertise and capability to build a state-of-the-art building to house evidence and property for the Metropolitan Police Department. In addition, we do have a site visit scheduled at the current location, which is Shannon Place, and that's scheduled for January the 8th. Now, there is a security requirement. Since this is a secured facility, we're going to pass out today a pre-registration form. Because this is a secured facility, we've decided to allow 2 individuals from each organization to attend the site visit. Now, when I pass out the form, I'm going to ask that you complete the information, and by the close of business today, you will receive an email of a form requesting additional information for the screening, and you will be required to submit a disclaimer. That form will be due back to me January the 7th by 12 noon. And also, in our solicitation, we ask that you submit by January the 18th capability statements, any additional questions that you might have, and recommendations for the solicitation. We would also like for you to submit a cost for the proposed solution. And I would like to just reiterate that the information that you are submitting is for planning purposes only. And at this time, I'd also like to take the opportunity to just introduce some of my colleagues from the Office of Contracting and Procurement. We've already met David Gragan, Ms. Karen Hester, who is the contracting officer for the project, and Will Giles, who's the Chief of Staff. From the Office of Property Management, we have Mr. Garrett Smith, who's the Deputy Director. And at this time, I'm going to ask that the Metropolitan Police Department, their representatives, just introduce yourselves.
Hey, I'm okay. Good morning. Edward Hamilton. I'm the Executive Director of Corporate Support for Metropolitan Police Department, and that basically translates to all logistics, support functions, and everything not requiring a gun. And accompanying me, I have Lieutenant Derek Gray, who is the Evidence Control Branch Manager, Mr. Burt Glassman, who's my Special Assistant and Project Manager, Captain Paul Shelton, Lieutenant Gray's Supervisor, and Mr. Mike Hoyt, who is the Division Chief for General Support Services, and Cheryl Mitchell, my Chief Administrative Officer. Okay? Right? Thank you.
Also at this time, I'm going to go ahead and just open the floor up to the Metropolitan Police Department. Ed's going to go into some of the problems that we're having now and some of the goals that we would like to achieve in this process.
To somewhat set a frame of reference to the facility, Shannon Place facility is a roughly 110,000 square feet facility. It right now occupies about 3 floors and a basement. Of that 110,000 square feet, roughly about 90,000 of that is committed to evidentiary storage. Now, at the location, there's also an area we call equipment and supplies. Equipment and supplies is a sub-element that's responsible basically for general receipt, issuance, and storage of supplies that are non-evidentiary. That includes items such as uniforms, office supplies, police-related equipment, that's handcuffs, badges, etc., that all fall into the non-evidentiary role.
Not weapons.
Not weapons, no. No weapons, not weapons. The service weapons are not managed there. Now, within, and that gives me a segue to the evidentiary storage. Within the evidentiary storage, we're storing the major categories such as weapons. And that includes pistols, rifles, machine guns, bayonets, sabers, anything that could be used or has been used in the commission of a crime. Also, we have a currency vault, or what we call a cash vault, that basically falls in the criteria of a bank vault. We also have an area that maintains storage for drug-related items. That means drug substances, controlled substances, as well as drug paraphernalia. The remainder of the evidentiary storage or warehouse is in the category of what we classify as general evidence, and that falls into basically row upon row of shelf-stored items. Some of those items are DNA-related and also classed in the area of biohazards. The staffing at the current location right now is roughly about 30 personnel. 15 of those are sworn officers, the remainder civilians. Now, the evidence function, like I say, predominantly is exclusively at Shannon Place location. We have a secondary site at Blue Plains that is not part of this solicitation, but just for information purposes, Blue Plains is where we maintain the impound lot. So vehicles that are impounded or seized related to evidentiary purposes are stored there. There is a connectivity in the context that the technology that supports the evidence facility at Shannon Place needs to also have a connectivity and exportability to the evidence that's maintained at Blue Plains. Now, there are some unique criteria that has already been alluded to earlier. The evidentiary items that we maintain, as Dan mentioned early on and very, very profoundly stated, is necessary and used either in the prosecution of a crime or in the defense of an individual that may have been accused of a crime. For that purpose, what makes evidentiary storage different from normal or generic warehouse storage is the chain of custody and the controls associated with it. Beyond that, we're storing stuff. It's stuff. It's maintained, it's inventoried, it's issued, it's cared for. Beyond that, it's just normal stuff. But where the unique aspects come into evidentiary storage is the stuff we're storing has lives associated with it. It also has durations associated with it. We have a law in the District of Columbia called the Millicent-Allowell Act that says that any evidence associated with an unsolved crime that's homicide related, we must maintain for 65 years plus. If that is a cold case, that item has to be maintained in the warehouse for up to 65 years. And there's an effort to move it toward 100 or to perpetuity. In addition, we have a requirement for other items that are associated with misdemeanors, 5 years, Derek, that after 5 years we can release. The other unique aspect of this is the chain of custody controls. The evidence that's maintained at the warehouse is pretty much stored and it's maintained there until one of two things happens. One being that a court representative, either a defense attorney or a prosecuting attorney calls for that evidence to be produced in court for presentation, or it's released to a prisoner. Some of the evidence that's maintained in that warehouse falls in the category of what we call prisoner property. If you're the unfortunate guest of my central cell block facility and the D.C. jail, that property that comes in through the evidentiary chain is released back to you. If you're released or your charge is released or whatever, that property is released, but until it's released back to your custody, it's secured at the evidence warehouse. So there's a daily volume, if you will, of property that turns over that's released back to the custody of the owner. Beyond that, the remaining items are maintained in storage for court usage. Also important that you know that in addition to the storage solution and the accountability aspects, we also have a requirement for what we call purging. Purging meaning that at appointed times when that evidence is no longer required to be maintained for storage, it is not an item that can be released back to an individual, then we purge that item from our inventory. Meaning that in the case of currency, it's deposited into a bank account. In the case of a weapon, it's burned and destroyed. In the case of drugs, it's burned and destroyed. So those are all part of the unique aspects of the storage requirement and storage solution that's above and beyond normal warehousing. With that, I think we're prepared now to ask any questions or comments.